So there's going to be a review of Haunted Mansion, the new movie based on the Disneyland ride of the same name. Now, I didn't really have a ton of interest in seeing this movie, but I did have some free time this past Saturday. Decided to check it out, and as I do with almost all the reviews I do, I did not see any of the reviews or Rotten Tomatoes score before going into this movie, so I wasn't quite sure what to expect. As mentioned, this is a movie based on a Disneyland ride. Continues a trend that Disney has had for a decent amount of time, of making movies based on their signature original Disney rides. So no, Splash Mountain does not count in that case. But with these rides based on movies, they've always been chasing that success they had with Pirates of the Caribbean. Specifically those first three, just the level of box office, quality, how popular those films were. But they have done more movies than just Pirates of the Caribbean. They had The Country Bears, which was garbage, Tomorrowland, futuristic garbage, most recently The Jungle Cruise from a couple years ago, which actually ended up being okay. But Disney would have you believe that this version, this 2023 Haunted Mansion, is their first Haunted Mansion movie they've done. Well, that's actually not the case because they had a Haunted Mansion movie come out the same year the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie came out, 20 years ago in 2003, starring Eddie Murphy. Now, this movie doesn't really have the best reputation. It didn't really get great reviews, didn't do that well at the box office. Remember seeing it as a kid on Disney Channel, and I honestly thought the movie was okay. And to be honest, still to this day, I think it's okay. I think it has okay atmosphere, a decent story, incorporates some of the elements of the ride alright. So as a movie and an adaptation of the ride, I think it's alright. Now, that Eddie Murphy movie from 2003 was titled The Haunted Mansion. This new 2023 one is just Haunted Mansion. As we've seen with Suicide Squad and The Suicide Squad, Predator and The Predator, and most recently Batman and The Batman, adding or removing the from your title can make that big a difference. With the plot of this movie, a group of individuals end up entering the Haunted Mansion, and they must work together to remove a curse, otherwise they'll continue to be haunted in their days, even if they choose to leave the Haunted Mansion. Now, with all of these rides or movies based on these Disneyland rides, you'd obviously hope they're great, a la the level of quality from that first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, Curse of the Black Pearl from 2023. But at the bare minimum, you hope that you're getting a fun movie. You're getting a freaking movie based on a ride. It better be fun. And like I said, I thought a couple years ago, the Jungle Cruise movie they did actually ended up being okay overall. Now, also, as someone who works at Disneyland, I have an added eyebrow raised for this movie as it relates to being an adaptation of the actual Haunted Mansion ride as a movie in terms of incorporating those elements. And as it relates to that, well, I'll say this. This movie's sole justification seems to be incorporating and featuring the elements from the ride that 2003 movie did not. With this 2023 version, it actually does include the Hatbox Ghost, the ghost sprite in the attic, the stretching room, the dinner scene with the ghost dancing and the ghost on the chandelier. But it goes both ways, because this movie has some stuff that the Eddie Murphy did include that this movie does not. So the 2003 Eddie Murphy movie actually did include the singing statue heads, more of the hitchhiking ghosts, Madame Leota doing the actual stuff that she does on the ride, the dude that's hanging himself from the ceiling, the turning statue heads, and the graveyard scene, where all the grim grinning ghosts come out to socialize. Whether or not you prefer the ride inclusions in this film or the 2003 film is honestly up to you, but it's honestly irrelevant when judging this movie as a movie. Now, when judging this film on its own, the scariest thing about it is how much worse it is than the Eddie Murphy movie in almost every way. There's just no sense of urgency or danger in this film. You have the premise where these people must remain in the mansion, otherwise they'll be continuously haunted by these various spooks. But we quickly see the movie abandon this, as they're able to leave the mansion several times to complete several quests, and nothing happens to them at all, undercutting the whole premise and urgency that the movie seemingly set up just goes out the window. Another reason that I felt no urgency here is because I didn't care or really have any investment in any of these characters. Your main character here is played by Lakeith Stanfield. I think he plays Ben. Forgive me, I don't really remember all of these characters' names. He plays sort of a guy who specializes in ghost photography, but he almost seems to be doing it as a joke. When he initially gets hired by Rosario Dawson's character, he's just taking it as a joke and not that serious. And so like, well, either you're someone that's into investigating ghosts or not. He does have the only meaningful storyline in this film for any of the characters, and that's him learning to deal with the loss of his wife. I think any storyline where characters learn to grieve is a good storyline that teaches people a good lesson. But your other characters in this film are just whatever. Owen Wilson plays a priest, and they reveal something about him at the end that's like, well, that doesn't even make sense. How does this even happen? Rosario Dawson plays the mom who initially purchases the haunted mansion. And I love Rosario Dawson, but her character is just there as whatever. Danny DeVito plays, well, Danny DeVito, I guess just an even crazier version, to where it's just kind of schizophrenic, making all these weird comments, yet seemingly he's an expert on hauntings and ghosts. Is the kind of humor you expect to have in Danny DeVito in a film like this. Same goes for Tiffany Haddish. She plays, well, a shrink. And it's the kind of humor you expect when Tiffany Haddish decides to play a shrink. You know, just blacken it up in every possible way she can. Now, the first hour or so of this movie doesn't really have much to do with the ride. You know, your first initial main showcase that you do get is the Hatbox Ghost. That's something from the ride that was not in the original 2003 film. And it's cool here because they do make him sort of the main antagonist in this film. So it's nice that they took an element from the ride and made it the main villain. But ultimately, his grand scheme just doesn't feel all that interesting or worthwhile, mainly because the movie was missing that sense of urgency and whatnot. Perhaps the most disappointing element from the ride incorporated in this film was Madame Leota. In this case, she was played by Jamie Lee Curtis. Now, I love Jamie Lee Curtis, but the problem with here is that while they do give her a bit more depth in terms of providing her backstory, I honestly felt like her role in the story was just better in the 2003 film, mainly because it was Madame Leota doing the kind of stuff that she does on the ride, and just overall I thought the incorporation of her in the story just was not very good. And honestly, I thought the effects were pretty terrible here also. While the look of her in this film is, I guess, more accurate to how she looks in the ride, personally, I feel like the way that they did her in the 2003 movie in terms of just pure look and visuals was better. They weren't stricken by the ride. Here, just the hair effects and the movement and the way the face moved, it just looked pretty terrible if you ask me. Now, admittedly, some of these complaints, specifically the Madame Leota one, is stuff as it relates to this film being an adaptation of the classic ride. But even on its own, this is still really shitty. There's never reason to care about any of the stakes here. Every scene is just these characters bumbling along, attempting to do some lame Scooby-Doo type shit. And the plot and my level of interest in this film just got worse and worse and worse to where I honestly wanted to walk out by the end. Urgency is something I've mentioned a few times in this review, and that comes into play because that's something that the Eddie Murphy movie surprisingly did have. You know, in that movie, it was him, his wife, and his kids that were actually stuck in the haunted mansion, and he had to work to save them, specifically saving his wife, who was caught up in sort of the main villain's plot in that film. He had to save his kids. There was a family dynamic he had to work out. You know, having that was real stakes in this film that this movie definitely just did not have, because you just could not give a shit about any of those characters. On the plus side, I did think this movie had a decent, I would even say solid look. It's sort of a muted yet tinted blue kind of look, which works well for the various spooks and sort of hauntings going around in this movie. But that doesn't save this movie from just an oh my god, get me the fuck out of here kind of experience I had. So I would give this film 3 out of 10 grim grinning ghosts. Again, I just think that Eddie Murphy movie is just okay, which is better than what most people say about it. But there is no reason to do another Haunted Mansion movie 20 years later, unless it's going to be significantly better than that version, and this one clearly is not. Maybe they'll get it right in another 20 years from now. Can't fucking wait. So that'll do it for this review of Haunted Mansion. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you for watching.